everyone. I think if you can find a seat, we'll go ahead and get started with our first Climate Action Plan Town Hall meeting. We're very excited about this opportunity to have the public participate and listen to our consultant SSG go over their information and get your input on questions that they may have. So my name is Deb Shildroth. I'm Assistant City Manager for the City of Ames, and I'm one of the members of the Climate Action Plan project team. And we would have a more formal welcome from Mayor Hala and ISU President Winterstein, but they are currently at another meeting that has went significantly longer than they anticipated. So hopefully they'll be able to join us here soon. And at that point that they do that, they'll present their opening comments and welcome to you as well. So again, thank you for being here this evening. And I'm going to turn it over to Denise Hurt with Confluence to talk a little bit about our meeting objectives and to help introduce our consultant. And quickly before I do that, we do have members from our Supplemental Input Committee here in the room. If you wouldn't mind raising your hand so people can see. Wonderful. So the Supplemental Input Committee is a 27-member committee of citizens that are representing a variety of sectors in our community and are going to be those tentacles for us to gather information and input as we work towards the Climate Action Plan process. So get familiar with these individuals and help get your voice heard as we move along in the process. So thank you again for being here. Denise?
Thanks, Deb. As Deb said, I'm Denise Hurt. I'm with Confluence, a landscape architecture and planning firm that's located here in Des Moines. And I'm helping out the SSG team by kind of being the in-person face. As you'll notice, they're going to be presenting online tonight. So we're here tonight with the City of Ames and the city's Climate Action Planning Consultants, Sustainability Solutions Group, to introduce community members to the Climate Action Plan. We have a number of topics that we'll hear about tonight and some opportunities for questions and input. The presentations focus on informing you about the climate action planning process that has just recently gotten underway, to let you know how you can stay involved, inform you on the latest climate science and targets that are being set by countries and cities all over the world, as well as close to home, and share with you Ames' starting point and trajectory in climate planning. So tonight we'll go over project roles and responsibilities, including how members of the public can participate tonight and throughout the process. We'll talk about climate action planning and target setting, how we go about climate action, why climate action is important, and what other communities have been doing. We'll talk about business as usual results. So you may hear the acronym BAU. That stands for business as usual. We'll look at the local context in Ames, including what our future emissions trajectory looks like and without climate action planning, what that could mean. We'll do some interactive polling throughout the session using a service called Mentimeter that you'll access on your smartphone. If anyone here doesn't have a device that would allow them to do so, I believe we have some extras that we would be able to help facilitate that. So just raise your hand when we get to that point, let us know, and we'll help make that happen. With that in mind, let's talk about some of the meeting etiquette and operating values before we turn it over to SSG. As you may have noticed, they're joining us online. They'll provide presentations. They're going to operate that interactive tool I talked about, and they're the ones that are going to answer most of your questions. In order to achieve that, we ask that all of the following meeting etiquette and operating values are followed. So to do that, we'll balance presentation with time for questions and answers. SSG will answer questions as time allows at the end of each of their topic presentations. We'll have you guys raise your hand and I'll invite you to come up to the podium. Just that allows everyone to hear what's being said, use the microphone. But because of the room setup and microphones, SSG will hear some feedback. So we'll want to be a little bit cautious about that and try and keep just one person speaking at a time just to keep that kind of clear for them. We ask that everyone show respect for each other by speaking one at a time, using safe language and listening. We're going to try and balance airtime to hear from as many voices as possible. We ask that you be curious and challenge assumptions and biases. And lastly, let's come together in the spirit of community as we begin learning about and developing the Climate Action Plan. So now I'd like to introduce our project team with the city and the SSG team, members that you'll hear from tonight. And at this time, I'd invite our city staff to introduce themselves, the role they play with the city, and the role they play on this team.
I'm Deb Shildroth, again, Assistant City Manager and member of the project team.
I'm Mary Rankin. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Ames in a dual role with Iowa State University as the Sustainability Director, and I'm also on the core project team.
Hey, good evening. It's good to see so many people here. I'm Susan Guiasta, the Public Relations Officer for the City of Ames.
My name is Kaylee Badias Lane. I'm the Energy Services Coordinator for the City of Ames, and I am also on the project team for the Climate Action Plan.
Awesome. And then I will ask the same of our SSG friends. So Brittany, since I see you on the screen, I'll let you kick it off on that end.
Hi, my name is Brittany McLean. I'm a consultant with Sustainability Solutions Group and the lead analyst on this project.
Yule, if you're there.
Hi everyone, I'm Yule Herbert. I'm a principal of SSG. Very pleased to be here, as it were.
Naomi.
Hi everyone, I'm Naomi Devine. I'm a member owner with SSG, Climate Action Planner, and Engagement Lead. Really wonderful to see you all here tonight.
Awesome. And Eric.
Hi everyone, I'm Eric Finette. I'm the lead modeler for the Climate Action Plan modeling.
Awesome. Great. So to recap, tonight's meeting will be facilitated as follows. There'll be a series of 3 presenters from the SSG team with a designated Q&A period after each of those presentations. Throughout the presentation, there'll be an interactive engagement with a series of open-ended questions for you all to answer. To share answers and facilitate discussion, we ask that all participants log on to menti.com, MENTI.com. We'll be showing that on the screen and giving you the login code at the right time. And then city staff and myself will be here to help in any way we can if anyone's having problems with that. And please remember that the consultants are presenting online and they may be able to hear some conversation in the room. So if we can kind of keep, again, that one person speaking at a time rule, that would be great. And with that, I will turn it over to Naomi to kick us off.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. And welcome again, everyone. It's very exciting to be part of this process and, of course, indeed to be part of a climate action planning process for any city. So we hope that you are feeling excited about it as well. We're here to essentially be your guides through the meeting tonight and share a lot of information with you and help situate essentially how this project is rolling out and how you can play a part in shaping its outcome so that it's the best possible climate action plan for Ames. So to go over the objectives for tonight's meeting, so we want to inform the participating community members, so you, about the objectives of the plan, the project teams who just met us as well, and the time frame of the climate action plan, or sometimes you'll hear us refer to it as a CAP or CAP for short, because we're big fans of acronyms in this world. The business as usual, or BAU, that's probably the acronym that you're going to hear the most this evening, results. So what does it look like if we were to just let emissions sort of run wild as they kind of currently are? And I don't mean to suggest that Ames is running any wilder than anywhere else. What we mean is if we didn't sort of put a planning process in place, essentially, what would happen? We'll take a look at that. And emissions planning itself and target setting, sort of what that looks like. We would like to involve you, the community members, in providing input on your vision for Ames's low carbon future. And so we've got some stuff planned tonight to take you through specifically that process. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of expected outcomes for tonight's meeting, we want you to be able to understand the process itself of both science-based greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG, there's one of those acronyms again, reduction target setting processes, and best practices from other communities. So we'll take a look at that as well. We want you to understand the level of action and investment required from a climate action plan in order for a community to meet its chosen greenhouse gas emissions or GHG reduction targets. And again, the best practices from other communities who are working on this as well. We want you to also understand the increasing costs of inaction. So we often hear conversations about what it will cost for climate investment or climate action planning investment, but there's also, of course, a cost to taking no action. If that business as usual were to become the future, what would that look like for Ames, and what essentially would it cost everyone? And of course, there are a lot of benefits of action, and we're here to talk about that tonight as well. And we want you lastly to understand the impact of your participation in shaping a CAP or climate action plan. And we really are looking for as many people in Ames as possible to act as champions for implementation of the plan. Let's go to the next slide. This is sort of a really high-level overview, essentially, of a climate action planning process, and the one specific that's been designed for Ames. So you can see what the takeaway from this, because the full details of it are also on the project website as well, which we'll share with you, and you can take a deeper dive, is to show that there's multiple points, essentially, along this journey, where we'll be both receiving input from you, receiving input from other affected party groups that are part of the engagement process, and technical experts as well along the way. And we take a look at things like tonight, where we start with the business as usual, that's our central starting point, and move on to things like target setting itself in the future, and low carbon action development, how we essentially set those, coming up with the low carbon scenarios, and we will again talk more about this specifically this evening, so don't worry too much, we're going to take a deeper dive. What the financial implications, of course, are, and what does implementation planning begin to look like as well, because once the climate action plan is set, of course, the next big step is how does it get implemented and how do we make it real, of course, as a community, before we get to drafting the plan. So let's take a pause right here. As we mentioned in the operating values, we promised to sort of stop and take your questions as we can along the way. So what I want to ask you is, what questions do you have at this point?
Again, feel free to raise your hand and come on up, or you can share your question and I'll say it for you if that makes you more comfortable. Okay, I'm not seeing any at this time, Naomi.
Oh, Denise.
Okay.
Oh, did I? Sorry.
We'll carry
I do
on
have
then.
one.
That's great. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry,
Naomi, I'm
Naomi.
sorry that.
All right, so in terms of specifically in that project, the project roles and responsibilities, let's take a deeper look then at the timeline. So the section here that we have in blue essentially covers all different points of engagement opportunities along the climate action planning process. So you'll notice, those of you who have eagle eyes will notice that the town hall is happening actually a little bit earlier, because we wanted to kick off that discussion a little bit earlier, and that further engagement opportunities will be presented as well to give commentary on things like target setting and the low carbon action development. Those might not look like town halls, they'll probably be in the form of surveys or other types of engagement opportunities. Any type of climate action plan process embraces multiple forms of engagement, so we want to be clear about that, is that the engagement opportunities are there sort of baked into the plan, but also look a little bit differently depending on what question that we're asking at each stage of the plan and what type of feedback we need essentially at each stage of the plan. The type of feedback that we're going for overall is to be able to present you with options and hear about what your aspirations are around those and what the concerns are, so that we can take that feedback back into the process. And we do something called iterative planning. So you'll see the sort of around, there's a sort of circle that we've got there, and we've got arrows around that. So we hear essentially from the affected parties, or sometimes they're referred to as stakeholders, and then we take that feedback into our process and we let it modify essentially the process and come back out with our outputs to that. So along each stage of the process, we also talk about how we'll take the feedback that you've given us and explain how it's been used in the final plan itself. So you'll see that too as we approach the end of the climate action planning process. Let's go to the next slide. So digging a little bit deeper, essentially when I talked about different types of engagement processes or techniques, you'll see this here. So we have a supplemental input committee that has various members of the public who applied for the seats on that committee and represent the different sort of sectors of Ames. And so they meet in forms of workshops that are not too dissimilar to tonight's town hall. We have the city project team that meets, has meetings and workshops essentially together, where they walk through the same information that we're giving you this evening to be able to give us feedback as well in that iterative process that I mentioned. We'll be interviewing, and we've already started to interview subject matter experts and have focus groups as the engagement process continues. And of course, community members, we engage and want to hear from you as well. So like I said, there'll be the multiple opportunities for you to provide feedback, of which tonight is one of those opportunities. So things like town halls, and you'll see some surveys coming out from us as well. Each of these techniques has been designed, of course, to help shape that climate action plan so that together we can make the best possible climate action plan recommendation to our decision makers, which is the City Council of Ames. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So far, how am I doing? Let me know if there are any questions or if anything is unclear.
Yes, please come on up. Right here would be great.
Hello, my name is Abigail Moser, and I am an employee at the National Renewable Energy Lab. And I was wondering what is the range of years your model runs for the business as usual scenario?
I think I look frozen, but hopefully you can still hear me. And so in terms of the years, Eric, are you okay to answer that question?
Sure. So we're modeling, we're using 2018 as our base year, and we're modeling up to 2050.
All right.
Great, thank you for that question.
Yes, and will you be using supply and demand models as well, or supply and demand integrated into your model to be able to kind of represent how the growing demand in Ames and how you can sort of reflect that in your climate action plan?
So, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Was there more?
No, you're good.
Okay, great. Eric, I'll get Eric to answer that question, but we are going to go into modeling specifically in the next sections of the meeting. So if there's more modeling questions, I'll ask folks to hold them until then. But Eric, did you want to take that one up?
Sure. So yeah, that's a really good question, and
I could take a lot of time to dive deep in that question, but I'll be brief and we can get back to it in the modeling section. But basically, the model we're using is a stocks and flow model, and we're using demand projections as inputs and different demographic data as inputs, but I can get into more detail a bit later.
Thank you.
And for those that didn't hear, she was asking about supply and demand. So in any case, he'll circle back and provide a lot more detail than I could when he talks about modeling. And as she did, please state your name before you.
My name's Paul Reedhead. And this may be a question more for city staff. Is there a connection between the Climate Action Plan development and the Ames 2040 plan?
Yeah, we have been in touch with people who work on the Ames Plan 2040, and they are expecting the Climate Action Plan to integrate into Ames Plan 2040. They've basically left a spot to integrate it.
So before they finish developing that plan, before that plan is finished developing, this will be.
No, the timeline will not work. They plan to get the Ames Plan 2040. They're hoping to get it done by the end of this year, whereas this process will be behind. So we know that it's basically, there's a holding spot.
Placeholder.
Yeah.
Right.
So the timeline did not work ideally. We're aware of that.
Well, there's a lot of urban sprawl in the Ames 2040 plan. So that to me undermines this whole process right here.
maybe I can jump in if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so we did get data from the
2040 plan as raw data and not as part of the final completed plan. So we are integrating both plans in that way. And we are including the sprawl aspect and any plans for development based on different zones.
I would say all of these questions are valid. I'm going to try and steer them to stick towards engagement at this point, just so that as we get into the next parts of the presentation, your question may or may not be answered. At that point, please bring it forward. But if there's any other questions that have to do with engagement at this point, come on up.
Sorry. Hello, I'm Denis Lavrov, and I'm a professor at Iowa State University. And since the university makes a big part of Iowa State, or a big part of Ames, and as well has a lot of expertise, I'm wondering how the university is involved in the process. Thank you.
Fantastic question. I think I can start that off, and then members of the project team, names also want to add anything, please do so. So we began the process for designing the engagement plan, and thank you for your question, it's a good one, with also speaking to we spoke to members of the community, including representatives from the university, both from the student side and the administrative side, in what's called the pre-engagement process. So one of the values under the International Association of Public Participation, or IAP2's values for engagement, is to speak to essentially to representatives about how they would like to be engaged. So right from the beginning of the engagement process design, we heard from members of the university community. And then we do have somebody from the university as part of our project planning team, but is it Mary, did you want to speak to this, or perhaps Deb?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. In my combined role, I'm representing the university as well as the city. But of course, on the supplemental input committee, we specifically, and in fact, during council discussions around the makeup of the membership of that supplemental input committee, it was noted that we needed to have additional university representation. So as well as there being the applicant process that involved 3 students, the president has also appointed 2 individuals to serve from the university, faculty and staff, and also then student government has also appointed a representative within those discussions. All of those supplemental input committee members then from the university serve in that role of assuring that we are gathering input from the university committee, or excuse me, community, in order to be able to ensure that that voice is heard.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm just taking a look at the time as well. I'm not sure if there's another questioner, but I know that we will need to move on shortly. I think we've got time for one more question, and then there'll be more question and answer periods this evening where we'll stop for that.
Looks like we've got one more.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jacob Stevens. I'm a student at Ames High. And I think I might speak for some of the members of the Supplemental Input Committee here tonight that I was kind of disappointed with the amount of input we actually got on the substance of the plan at the first meeting. And I know it's early in the process, but what steps are going to be taken in the future to ensure that we actually get to our say on the actual what actually goes into the plan and the goals that are set in the plan?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the project diagram that we went to, and I don't know if we can go back to that for a second, Brittany, that's great. Thank you very much. So the first supplemental input committee would have been focused again, and it was focused on the business as usual scenario so that the committee could understand, and same thing that we'll be presenting tonight, what the situation looks like with respect to emissions if we weren't to plan, essentially for a different type of future. And so at the next stage, we'll be getting your feedback on target setting and low carbon action development. And what that takes a look at is we take a deeper dive into what science-based targets are and what the implications potentially are for a community, so that we can receive input on where the committee itself or whomever we're speaking to at the time when we're talking about this topic, how they feel essentially about moving forward with that type of a target or a different type of a target. Same thing for low carbon action development. So there's a variety of assumptions that go into the modeling process for different potential low carbon scenarios. And we need to essentially ground them in the reality of Ames. So that's where we need to hear from supplemental input committee members or the public, for example, on the assumptions that we currently have and how we'd like to essentially modify them. Same type of thing happens into the modeling process itself, and also for the low carbon financials as well. Same types of questions are asked. So we'll present a series of options, like assumptions, and we'll ask essentially for input to see if those are correct or if there's other assumptions or things that we should be considering. So that the feedback gets incorporated at multiple steps in the process. Great, thank you for your question. Okay, so for those of you, if you have your device sort of in front of you, we'd love for you to go to menti.com. We've got it up on the slide there, and to enter the code. And I believe if you don't have a device, there are devices available for people to use. And if you're at home, same thing, you can go to menti.com as well and enter the code, and you'll be able to participate this way as well.
Is this the same as the link that was given for the public comment that was made available previously?
Yes. Naomi, I'm not sure if you heard that. Is this link the same as one that was previously put up for public input?
Yeah, I think I didn't hear that, but no, it's a different link.
Okay.
Maybe a number.
And different code, I should say. So same link, but different code.
Okay. Extra devices?
Yes.
Is it now?
And Brittany, do you want me to share my screen?
Nope, that's perfect. That's exactly where you want to be. So it's going to bring you to a screen where it will start asking you questions, and that's where you'll respond, and those answers will populate on the screen.
Should supplemental input committee members figure out even if we did, if it's a workshop?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything.
No. Yep. All right, looks like we've already got some early answers in here for those of you who've been able to join. Starting off with the first question of what makes Ames a great place to live? So you see, and essentially the larger a word that you see on the screen is that the more answers have come in, essentially with that is how this tool works. This is great. So safe comes through really clear, which is quite nice. Free community events, for example. The university, Ride, it's friendly. Community coming up there too as well. at Parks. There we go. Nice work, everybody. Thank you very much for your participation in this. Okay. And you can see it sort of dynamically updates the more you participate, the more answers that we essentially get into here. They'll be reflected on the screen as well momentarily. Fantastic. We'll give this a few more seconds and then we're going to move into the climate action planning and target setting portion of the presentation. All right. We heard for about Slyride too in the supplemental input committee as well. Nice to see the commonalities, of course, between the two groups. Great. So if you keep that open at different sort of spots in the presentation, we're going to be coming back to you and asking you more questions as we go along for this evening. So thank you very much for your participation and your time and your attention. I'm going to throw it back to Brittany. Great. Thank you, Naomi. I'm going to go through climate action planning and target setting. We'll look at it first from a more global view to give you an understanding of the importance of climate action planning and what it can do for us in the city of Ames. And then we will do a question and answer. There'll be a few more mentees throughout this, just so you know, a few more polls. And then you'll hear more details after I speak from Eric more specifically on Ames and trajectory within action. So why do we do this work? We do it because there's challenges and there's opportunities, essentially. There's increasing uncertainty in our world and all of our lives to do with climate change. So we have severe weather events, things are unstable, there's some unpredictability around the economy, just the future of our world, basically, based on the changes that we're seeing and are projected to see. There's a lot of costs to residents and the municipality. Some of those costs are financial, so there are costs to repair infrastructure, repair after storms, rebuild, all of those sorts of things, adapt to changing temperatures. That can be as simple as changing the hours of work to, having to install extra water fountains to, repairing multi-million-dollar bridges. It's there's a lot of financial costs, but there's also a lot of non-financial costs. We know from lots of research that have been done that there are health impacts, there are social impacts to climate change. The opportunity that comes with climate action planning and with reducing emissions, of course, is lower household energy consumption. A lot of the time this can translate to lower costs for individuals and households, improved health and quality of life. So those things that I just talked about, we can see the inverse of that. We can see better air quality, better water quality, more ability to just, go out and live our lives without worrying about extreme heat or severe weather events. And with that goes resilience and certainty. So when we look at community climate action planning, SSG in particular has a lot of experience in this, and we see it as a very holistic process. We need to look at every part of the community in order to do community climate action planning correctly. So we need to think about land use planning. We need to think about the infrastructure that's in place. We need to think about economic development. We need to make a transition away from fossil fuel use, but we also need to make sure that people's jobs are secure and people are trained correctly for the jobs of the future. We need to think about how people move around the city. We need to think about energy utilities. What does their future look like? How can they help move things forward? And how does that change, or how does their role change as we go through an energy transition? We also, of course, need to think about equity. How does a climate action plan impact different members of our community? So things as simple as, if you're a middle income family, it may be easy to put a heat pump in your house to save energy and save costs in the future and lower your emissions. But if you live in a low income household or if you rent, that may be more difficult to do. So how do we do this and make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, essentially? So now I'm going to ask you to go back to Mentimeter quickly, and I want to know, are there any environmental initiatives in Ames that you think have been really successful? Do we have some good things here that we can build on experiences and opportunities that we can draw from. So I'll give you a moment there to go back to Mentimeter. The question should be coming up for you now. You should see something at the top of your screen that says the presenter has moved the slide or something, and then you can click a button to move along. If you left the page, go to menti.com again and enter that code up in the corner, 3173595. And I'm going to head over there as well so that I can see the results. All right. This is really good information for us to know as well. So thank you very much for sharing this with us. Solar farms, Cyride comes up again. Seeing some not enough. Definitely want to hear things like that as well. City solar farm. All right. I'd like to add hydrogen, SunSmart coming up as a program as well, food waste diversion. Free composting. I think we've got time for about 30 more seconds or so. Brittany, would you say? Yep. That's great. Right, keep the answers coming in. That's great, thank you. All right. Solar is something that's definitely come up before too, so this is good to see. That's great. This is great. Thank you, everyone. So I have one more question that I want to ask along with that before we go into the rest of my part of the presentation. So I'd like to know, are there any other problem-solving examples in the community that have been really effective? So as you're answering this question, if we can really reflect on and think about, the scale of this challenge, what I just spoke about, it's holistic. We're going to have to work across sectors in the community. We're going to need a lot of partnership, a lot of people working at different angles. Are there good examples in Ames where big, large-scale problems have been addressed before involving lots of different people? Yeah, if there are lessons learned that were helpful, we want to, of course, know about those as well. Everybody should have access to that now. Just let me know. There we go. We're getting some answers. Great. EV infrastructure, community solar project, wind electricity. It's great. Yeah, the things that you're proud that the community has come together to work on and solve and advance. Safe Ride and Zip Car. Vaccine clinics, wonderful. It's nice to see we're seeing some of the environmental initiatives come through here as well as good examples. So there's obviously maybe a bit of history here of environmental projects that have been effective. Homelessness. Accessible park, that's a great one. What I like about it is we always learn something new. So we've got we have more reading to do essentially as well, which is really great. Water bottle fillers, food at first. It's like a co-op is mentioned in there as well. Oh, it's mentioned in that. Yeah. Yeah, this is great. All right, we're going to go back to the presentation now, so just bear with me one moment while I work with the technology here and get us back to the presentation. Thanks very much, Brittany. There'll be more, as Brittany said, opportunities. Of course, we'll be asking more questions. And of course, if you have other things that you'd like to tell us about too, on the project website, there's an email where you can email directly as well. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about what science is telling us about climate change. So this news article that's right here, it came out recently, I think came out in August, and it says there's some devastating impacts of global warming are now unavoidable, but there is still a short window to stop things from getting even worse. So where this comes from is the International Panel on Climate Change came out with a new assessment report of basically the science around climate change and where they think the world is headed in regards to warming and severe weather events if the whole world continues on the trajectory that we've been on. And the picture isn't great. We're looking at somewhere between 3 and 4 degrees of warming. And what we know, what scientists are fairly clear about is that if we stay on that trajectory, we kind of pass the threshold where our society as it is can kind of continue on without some serious issues. So we're going to see, wide-scale disasters and ongoing issues like extreme heat. We'll see increased morbidity and mortality. It's not a very pretty picture, but they give some hope that there's still this short window to stop things from getting even worse. And they give us some really great advice on some ways that we can slow things down. So I'm going to go into a little bit of that by telling you where some of the targets are right now. So a few years ago, there was something called the Paris Agreement that some of you may know about, and 191 nations across the world signed on to that. And what they signed on to was to essentially hit net zero emissions by 2050, and to try to keep the globe from heating beyond 2 degrees Celsius and ideally 1.5 degrees. So we see a lot of commitment around the world. Unfortunately, even with that, and relating back to that science report, the world isn't on track. So we're looking at, with current policies that are in place at a global level with all of those commitments, we would be looking at around 3 degrees of warming. Even if all the countries hit their pledges and targets in the Paris Agreement, we would be looking at 2.5 degrees of warming almost. And optimistically, with the net zero targets that are in place, we would be at 2 degrees. And we need to be even further. We need to be at that yellow or green line to see a consistent 2-degree warming or consistent 1.5 degree warming. And I guess what I mean by consistent is we can be pretty sure that we're going to stay within that threshold. So we have a gap. We need more action at the global level. Luckily, what we've seen is that a lot of cities have stepped up. In a lot of places, cities are really leading the charge. They're putting in, they're making commitments and pledging targets that are a lot stronger than what we see at the national level in a lot of cases. And local governments are a really good fit for climate action planning for a few reasons. They're really close to the people, and they're really close to the community. So it's easier for local governments to understand the concerns of their citizens, to understand the local context. What does the utility look like? What does the economy look like? How do we make sure it's a just transition for everybody, that we don't see huge amounts of job losses or people don't get left behind? So that's something that's just better done at the local level than at the national level. And that's why we're fans of, climate action plans at the local level. We believe they're really effective, and that's what we're here to help do, is to help facilitate that. If we look at more locally at some of your neighbors, there are a number of communities that we've found that have net zero targets by 2050. And so, as I mentioned, these are kind of the bare minimum that will kind of help us forward. But we may not bring us to that 1.5 degree warming we want. And I'll talk a little bit more about what does. So Des Moines has a net zero by 2050 target in place, and they're also looking at decreasing emissions by 45% by 2030 from their baseline here. Iowa City has a similar target, and then we see similar net zero targets in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Bloomington, Indiana, Lawrence, Madison, La Crosse, Middleton. So we see a lot of net zero, which is really great. And some of these communities, Des Moines is a great example, has an interim target to lower their emissions to a certain amount by 2030, which really helps us get a lot closer to that 1.5 degree warming goal. So having that interim target and saying we will decrease by this much in the next decade is important, because if we leave this all to 2048 and then try to deal with it all, it's not good financially, it's not good socially, and chances are we've already probably warmed the planet beyond that 1.5 or 2 degrees. So this kind of explains that there. In the first diagram, you see the fewest amount of emissions. So you see kind of emissions being at their peak maybe in 2018 or 2020. And then if they decrease rapidly, then we only have a little bit left to do at 2050. And you've avoided a lot of emissions kind of in the middle, I guess, in those middle years. You could also take a linear path and say, you know, we're going to decrease by the same percentage point every year, until 2050, until we get to zero. And, you know, that would take you on a path that would have more emissions than cutting them quickly, but less than the pathway that you see on the right. And so that's kind of the pathway I talked about, where you would look at just kind of business as usual until, you know, 2040 or so, and then try to really rapidly decrease emissions out to 2050 in order to meet that target. We talk a lot about a science-based climate target, and so what this basically means is trying to make sure that we don't warm beyond that 1.5 degrees. So it looks at guidance for cities to kind of go that fewest emissions route as well as they can, or somewhere between the fewest and middle if it's not feasible to do the fewest. So there's a lot of international organizations that agree this is the way to go. So these are, you know, big names in climate action planning, and it's aligned with the International Panel for Climate Change as well. It's definitely something worth reading if you're interested. So now before I take any questions, I want to ask a couple more questions of you, I guess. So I would like to know, are there any examples from other jurisdictions that you find inspirational? I mentioned a couple around your area, Des Moines and Iowa City, that have goals in place, but I'm curious to hear from you if there's places in the world or nearby that you draw inspiration from.
I'm looking forward to seeing what the answers are. All right, Minneapolis, Houston, Texas, and Lawrence, Kansas. Wonderful. Anywhere else? Iowa City and Cedar Rapids have really nice plans. Waterloo is a great veggie pollinator garden installation program to combine environmental and social sustainability. Wonderful. Des Moines, 100% clean electricity, rural communities, rural electric cooperatives. Yeah, signing up for renewable energy at unprecedented rates, member owned, and make decisions collectively. And any profit that occurs is distributed to the members. Western Europe, Iowa City's plan, large urban areas in the east. Goals earlier than 2050, because we can scroll down a little bit too, see what else is coming in. There certainly will be with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that starts next week. We'll start to see too what the latest is with respect to cities and countries. Copenhagen, 100% carbon neutral by 2025. Yeah.
Yeah, carbon neutrality is of course interesting, and then so is net zero, right? Carbon neutrality, of course, talking specifically about carbon, net zero talking about emissions beyond carbon. Lawrence, Kansas is getting a little up, I believe. Yeah.
I believe they're on a similar trajectory for finishing their plan as what Ames is, so that's great. I think my technology is not working great for me, Naomi, but I can see a few more things here. So I'm seeing more Iowa City, I'm seeing other countries, Europe, Norway, California, cities in California, Boston, include climate adaptation plans at neighborhood level. So that's, adaptation is another important consideration. Illinois, nation's leading climate bill. It's shutting down working coal plants. Boulder, Colorado, that's one we hear a lot. Decorah, Iowa, I haven't heard that one before. I'll have to look into that. Rural Iowa, gardening increasing in Iowa communities. There are goals, but very few have implemented effective policy to support infrastructure. Ames is living in the dark ages compared to many places inside and outside the US. Austin, Texas. This isn't necessarily climate action or water quality focused, but the whole Des Moines area has great watershed scale projects that involve a lot of innovative partnerships and new ways to get conservation on the ground. That's a great example there. I'm really glad to hear that one. It's we've looked into Des Moines, Iowa, and their targets, but it would be great for us to look into some of the other things that they're working on.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's wonderful.
All right. So let me move back to my presentation here again. And thank you for bearing with our technology this evening.
I forgot to mention, it's always an important operating value, I guess, for us to thank you for your patience with the technology as well. We appreciate it.
All right, so one of the things we recognize, it's really challenging. So a couple of people brought it up in that Mentimeter. We see a lot of goals. There are places where, the policy and action doesn't necessarily start right after those goals are set. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to get community engagement early on and through the project, and to understand, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities and barriers in the community, and to share those back with our decision makers, with city council, so that they can understand and hopefully develop effective policies. So what we know is that transformation of energy systems from fossil fuels to clean sources is underway. And reading some of these comments, it looks like there are some places of inspiration. There's some understanding that not all communities move forward as quickly as what their citizens would hope. So we'd like to just acknowledge that there are some of the barriers. So there's legislative authority. So, what happens at the state level versus at the local government level. Financing. One of the things that people are often surprised about, we used to hear about, economy versus environment, and it's not really as true anymore necessarily. In a lot of places, so we see that reducing energy and emissions can actually create economic stimulus in a local community, but there are upfront costs. So where does that initial financing or seed capital come from? Capacity is a big one. So we already have so many things on our plates. How do we manage this large issue as well? Culture and behavior. So again, it comes back to this involves everybody in the community. So we're hoping that council endorses a great plan and they put some great policy behind that. But everybody in the community has a role as well to change behavior to keep this going. So those are just some of the challenges, but it is very doable as well. We know that the technology exists, and so it really comes down to finding a plan that works for the community. All right, let's go back over to our Mentimeter. In considering opportunities to transition to a low carbon future, what gives Ames a unique advantage in tackling this issue? So we just talked about some of the challenges, so now I want to hear from you. What does Ames have going for it that can help us out here?
And this type of information, of course, helps us address those barriers and challenges that Brittany was just talking about, as well. Okay, existing public transportation, university expertise. Certainly is really wonderful to be working with the university town. That's quite helpful in the climate action planning process. Youth participation, committed to making community leaders, commit to 100% clean energy by 2030. That's certainly very wonderful here. It's always heartening to see two youth who are engaged in the community and to be pushing essentially where it is that we want to go. I think that's a really critical part of making successful climate action plans and making sure that implementation goes really well.
All right, I'm going to scroll down the list here, Naomi, and help you out. So lots of renewable resources in the form of solar and wind, local expertise at ISU, plenty of sunshine and wind, need to move away from burning trash for energy, renewable energy, local expertise, ISU and research, NREL. I'm not sure what that acronym is, but maybe somebody can clarify for us later. Open-minded population, educated, renewable energy, local expertise, and ISU research. Possibilities for geothermal applications, progressive elected officials. That's great to hear. Municipal electric utility, we think that's a great opportunity area as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. City financial strength, that's always a great starting point. Educated community, people with knowledge and interest in the issue. The fact that this meeting is being held, yeah, I hope it's a great first step. A community that is actively engaged in government, municipal utility focused on innovation. Great. All right, those are some great answers. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing those with us.
Yeah, thank you. They are great answers. Everything that you share with us too just helps us build, to each step of the plan. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so like I said, how can we get there? So we have the technological capabilities to get to net zero, and our climate action plan will bring us on an evidence-based path that identifies the financials, the schedules, the responsibilities, the barriers and risks, mitigating actions, what works in your community's context. So that's what that really brings us. We all know that the technology is out there, but how do we make it work for Ames? That's what we're trying to get at here. So one more question, I guess, and then I will take your questions. So if we can talk about aspirations. If there were no constraints, what is the first thing you would want to see happen in Ames to tackle this issue? So imagine we had no barriers whatsoever. We could just hit the ground running with this plan. What would you want to see happen first?
Excited to see the answers on this one too.
Let's get it queued up here.
Okay.
All right.
100% clean energy. Nice. 100% solar. 100% clean energy by 2030. Stop using fossil fuels. Bold climate action, dealing with waste. Looking at budget practices, better trash management. Fossil fuel divestment is obviously coming up here too. Limiting the size of houses. Biking, there we go. Promote residential solar. The support for solar is just fantastic too, seeing that across the board, yeah. Equitable transition, very, very important. Establishing a climate office. All electrification coming through pretty strong too.
some walking. So we've got, yeah, multiple transportation modes here. That's great.
Now, do not wait. It's great. As fast as possible. So we're having lots of answers around moving quickly and moving to clean energy. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for your answers. And I'm going to move back over here now, and I am going to take your questions on what you just heard.
Yeah, what questions at this point do you have about climate action planning, engagement, target setting? Happy to take all of them.
Come on up.
Hello, I'm Hector Arbuckle. I live in Ames. I'm also an ISU student. When will the city council be deciding on the emissions reduction goals, and what will the process be like for the public and for the supplemental input committee for like working to decide those goals?
That's a great question. Thank you. We have a meeting set with the city steering committee, so the city council, for November 16th. And at that time, what we will be doing with them is we will be walking them through some of the targets that are commonly set. And we'll be providing them with some information on the kind of the benefits and the challenges with each of those types of targets. And then we'll just be sharing that with information for them to take away at that point and to think about. And then once they have that information in their hands, we'll also be bringing that back to the supplemental input committee and to the public. And like you heard Naomi say earlier, the public, that will probably come in the form of a survey. And we'll be asking for input. We'll be asking some questions about that to the supplemental input and the community, and then we'll be back to City Council the next month, and we'll be providing the feedback to them, and then at that time we'll be asking them to choose a target. And based on the feedback, we can provide some degree of recommendation, but that decision is essentially in their hands after they've seen all of the evidence and all of the feedback from the community.
Any other questions? Yeah, come on up.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm also an ISU student. So I like how you laid out the plan there, but I was also wondering how is the city deciding what target they would like to set? Like, what's the criteria or certain conditions that you want these targets to meet?
Sorry, can I just clarify on that? Are you looking specifically for an answer from the city, or how the city is involved in, like city staff is involved in the process?
I guess I'm asking a question to the city.
Yeah. If you weren't able to hear, she's directing that to the city.
Yep, I can answer that. So a target has not been set. We're waiting for all of the information that's being presented to the steering committee and to the supplemental input committee, and then the public, like this meeting. And then we're taking that information back to the steering committee. They'll be presented with, I believe it's 4 different options in target setting, what those options are. And that would be that November 16th meeting. And again, that's information only. So then council can go back and kind of just chew on that information for a while. And then in between the November meeting, there'll be another steering committee on December 21st, where council will be asked to set the target, but there will be a supplemental input committee in between those 2 meetings, as well as the survey that SSG has talked about, to gather the information. And then we'll also talk about other options and ways to collect information besides those meetings. So they're listening to the consultants. They're listening to the information from the public as well, in order to set that target.
I think Naomi or Brittany or anyone, let me know if I'm saying this incorrectly, but I think as those options are presented, they're probably going to be presented with their opportunities and challenges.
Yes.
And then the city has to take those pros and cons basically and weigh those and see in alignment with what they've heard from the community and things like that, what feels right for our city. So does that answer your question? Okay. Any others?
Can I add a quick thing to that too?
Yeah.
I would just, add that the same options get presented, of course, too, to the supplemental input committee. So the same challenges and opportunities as well, and same thing to the public as well. So everyone can consider this from the same standpoint and give their feedback based on the same information.
Great, thank you. Excuse me, I haven't talked in a while. And I had some very spicy food, so. My name is Chris Anderson. I've lived in Ames since '94. And I have two questions. One, I just want to understand, when we have these meetings with the steering committee and with the supplemental input committee, will some sort of summary or meeting minutes or YouTube video be made available from those meetings for the public to see? Or is all those meetings going to be contained to the room that they're in?
Susan, can I get you to answer that question? I believe you'll be able to give us the best level of detail there.
Yeah, so all the meetings are public meetings and we are recording them through Zoom. And so we could put them on the archive. I don't think they are currently, but it's, they're certainly would be easy for anybody to watch. We have an archive on our website and we'll just add those.
And my second question is in regards to a really fluid federal process right now. There are likely to be quite a few tax incentives and things coming out this year, next year. I'm wondering how that can be incorporated into the process. If maybe you have some staff people dedicated to keeping up with, the 3,000 pages of whatever comes out, right, in the next 2 months or next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that piece will probably end up being department by department because each of the departments have the most up-to-date technical expertise in each of their expertise areas. So I believe that will probably be addressed as a group in the beginning of the planning and then carried on by the people who are within those expertise areas.
So they'll gather information from the technical expertise people in the city department. They'll get technical information from the federal legislation as they read it, or as their associations pass it along, or maybe as they hear word of mouth a little bit. Okay.
Chris, that's one group that we haven't mentioned, and they're very important to mention too, and that's our interdepartmental technical group, which includes individuals from Public Works, from our water and electric utilities, fleet services, SciRide, of course. So they're all involved too. They were very involved with the greenhouse gas inventory and continue involvement as it comes up and as needed throughout the climate action planning process. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Deb. And those are some of the experts that we talked to. And sorry if we didn't make that clear. They're very important partners in this. They really help ground truth for us as consultants, where other plans in the city are at, what they've been working on, how easy or difficult some of our recommendations are to integrate with what they're working on. And so it helps us understand, it's part of that context setting. So we get some of the context setting from the community, what's going on in your world, and how can we create a plan that works for you, and then what's going on in these different departments and in the city where we can help integrate our plan into theirs.
Hi, I'm Jerry Neal, and I think I'm going to follow up on Chris's question a little bit. And I don't know if I understand, or in the room here, we have a lot of people that are very interested in having at least a target that's considered to be fairly aspirational. And so far when we've talked, it seems like the conversations have been fairly well bounded by the examples we know from the Midwest and the kind of things that we've heard everybody done. And it doesn't, I think we're all kind of wondering, given that it is very fluid, that there's going to be a huge amount of changes in incentives and things that are available or probably available, that technologies are moving really quickly. Is it possible, or how do we have at least one scenario or goal that that really jumps forward and says, if these particular things would happen, we could really move in this direction at a completely different rate of speed? And I guess I'm kind of wondering if that's possible and what you would need from all of us to incorporate something like that into the scenarios that you're going to offer. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'll give you a brief answer here, and I'll invite you all to jump in if you guys want to say. So one of the things that we can do, one of the options certainly will be a science-based target. And so to clarify that, they're all science-based targets, right? But what is referred to as a science-based target at the IPCC level is that keeping within 1.5 degrees threshold. So sometimes when we're working with communities, what we begin to understand is at a local level, and given the local context, it can be difficult to determine every single action at this time that would help us meet that target. But what we can do, what councils sometimes do, is that they set that target anyway. And we can say, we can model out and we can give actions for, let's say, 90% of that. And then we leave the other 10% and say, okay, here's the gap between what we think is realistic in the community's context to get towards that target. And then there's a 10% gap that we hope that technology and innovation will fill over the next few years. And I'll see, I see you have your camera on, so I'll let you jump in there.
Sure. Yeah, I would just add that we use a model, which Eric will be introducing in a bit. And the fun thing about a model is we can really test out any kind of ideas without actually having to make them happen on the ground. So it's a really fun tool to explore what can be done in the future and what we can imagine can be done, and maybe even what we can imagine, but we can try it out anyway. So I think the possibility of exploring all sorts of different types of future is really there, and it's really about defining what we want to look at. The model is constrained by the physical reality that we have now. So if you take Ames, for example, there's a whole bunch of buildings that are already built. There's people who move in certain directions using certain types of vehicles. And it's quite tricky to switch that around really quickly. So that's the constraint that we have to manage within the model. And Eric will talk about how the model does manage that constraint and what it takes to overcome that. But the fun thing, I think the really fun piece about a model is it's just a simple mind exercise. Not so simple, but it's a mind exercise to enable us to explore the future.
And certainly, I think, just to add to that too, it all depends, of course, on the city, but sometimes a city might want to go after and we've had clients do this, the science-based target as defined in the guide, itself, but have to switch to an evidence-based target at first while they get on the ground and figure out through implementation exactly how constrained they are by the constraints that you'll just mentioned. And so when you're going to implement actions, of course, that does help. It's sort of like a feedback loop. It helps inform how fast you think you could get, even though you set a target and had an intention to get somewhere. Some things will move quicker than we think and some won't. And you want to sort of reassess about how you start to accelerate towards, sort of achieving that goal. So setting a target is certainly a very important part of the process. But also once you move into implementation, you'll find that action implementation also really helps inform the best way, essentially to get to your ultimate target and ultimate goal.
I just wanted to give our SSG folks a heads up. We've got 2 more questions here just to help you guys keep an eye on time. So
I think that's reasonable for us. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cheyenne, and I'm also a student at ISU. And I just have 2 quick questions, just following up on a couple of the other questions. I was wondering, for the 4 targets that you were talking about, do you have numbers for those targets at all yet that you were thinking about for those options? Like for example, what would be like the lowest that Ames would consider being like a plausible cut in emissions?
We don't have input at this time from City Council to be able to determine what would be kind of the highest or lowest that Ames would consider, but there are certainly established targets out there that we would ask City Council to look over, and that's what we'll give the information and background information on. And our recommendation would be to choose one of those four. Again, that is in their hands, but some of the ones that we often look at would be the science-based, so keeping it within 1.5 degrees. We would also look at aligning with the federal target. So none of them, we wouldn't look at something like saying, decreasing 10% by 2050. We don't feel like that would be responsible for us to recommend. So they all will look towards significant reductions, but at what speed? It's kind of the speed at which that happens that is in the hands of City Council. And you have something else to add there.
Okay. And then for my other question, just with the question with subsidies coming more available, I was wondering if you guys have any like grant writers hired specifically that are like focused on kind of seeking out money for this type of a transition?
No, I'll kind of bounce back to what Kaylee said earlier. Again, it's probably based on each department and what would be available through the expertise of that department and staff resources. But at this point in time, a specific grant writer to address subsidies, we don't have that kind of resource available. But I think it's fair to say as we move along within the climate action planning process and set those goals, put those in motion, looking at what we'll need for person power and staff resources in the future is definitely going to be one of those steps and things we need to look at. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Bill Gutowski, one of the Supplemental Input Committee members. I was wondering if your plan will have a specific expectation in it for periodic review. I think you've alluded to this, but a specific recommendation for periodic review to assess how well adapted technologies are working. Are there new technologies that perhaps were completely unanticipated? Maybe also just changes in public attitudes, public values in terms of what they would like to see get accomplished as well. Thank you.
That's a great question. Often we are at this point in our discussion yet about implementation framework with the City of Ames. But often what we will include in plans or what cities ask of us is, we have those modeled actions. So, decrease emissions from vehicles by this much by this date. But then there's also the models that the actions that we can't model. And a lot of those are around governance. So a lot of the time we will include those when the city asks for recommendations. So that may look at, how often should you review the plan? How often should you do a new greenhouse gas emissions to check in on where you're at in achieving your goal? How often, what are some typical ways that that cities would govern this? Like, is there a committee that stays in place? Is there, is that a council committee? Is it a community-based committee? So those are often discussions that we would have with the city when we get to that implementation stage.
Would now be a good time to wrap up Q&A on that particular section?
Feels like we have a very advanced set of supporters, sort of with us. So we're all of the things that you said tonight, we will capture as well, but also we'll welcome them as we continue on in the process, as well. So we will be coming to them. So it's we're just more at the beginning of the conversation, but it's good to know that you're ready for the rest of the conversation as well.
Well, I'd like to welcome Mayor Hala and Dr. Winterstein, who have just joined us. It sounds like you guys had a bit of a marathon meeting, so take a breather maybe. We have just kind of gone over talking about what our process is, introducing that to folks, talking about what climate planning is and what our process is. And we're about to step into the modeling results, the business as usual modeling results. So I'll kind of leave it up to the group. Would you guys like to hear that part and comment towards the end or interject at this point? Okay, great. All right. Well, we'll hand it back over and we'll let Eric fill us in.
Sounds good.
Share my screen for you, Eric.
Next slide is the right one. There we go. So here's the timeline for the project that we've seen earlier. And in terms of modeling, we've completed the first two dots here. So the first part here for the modeling is to collect all this data that goes into the model, which we worked really hard at and got a bunch of good data, and that's in the model now. And then the second part here is the baseline modeling and the business as usual modeling. For the baseline modeling, that's our 2018 base year, where we calibrated the model for 2018 and compared it to the Ames, the current inventory that's been done for the city to get everything aligned. And what we will look at tonight is the business as usual results. You can go to the next slide, please, Brittany. So what is a business as usual scenario? What we want to capture in this scenario is how things will look if things keep going the way they are going. So if there's no major changes to energy use or emissions, aside from what is currently planned, what does the future for Ames look like? And by future, what I mean is our model goes from 2018 to 2050. So that's the end point of our analysis. So what would Ames look like in terms of energy and emissions through that time period if we don't make any drastic changes over and above what's planned? And in terms of including things that are planned, we're talking about things that are very likely to happen. So current plans, things that are confirmed, funded, have a very high chance of happening. So we're being very, very conservative with this scenario. So there's different ingredients that go into this BAU scenario for the model. We use a lot of different data points that we got from the city to get our detailed results. One big one is demographic projections that we get from the city. So things like population, employment, and new buildings. And we also get that spatially. So we get that data for every traffic zone, and that's what we capture in the model. We also look at changes in climate, so temperature projection changes. So the average temperature is expected to increase with time. So we look at increased heating degree days, cooling degree days, and how that affects different things like how much energy is required to heat homes, things like that. We're also looking at changes in electricity emissions, how those change over time. Transportation, we've included, in order to align with the federal target, we've included the 50% of new cars sold by 2030 will be electric vehicles. So what we mean by that is that when you get to 2030, it doesn't mean that every vehicle is replaced by electric vehicles, or if that 50% are replaced with electric vehicles. But in 2030, whoever or whichever vehicle is purchased, half of those purchases would be EVs. So we see them slowly phasing in and changing the vehicle stock. And another big change that we've included is a change at Iowa State University, which is in 2024 to change the coal boilers in the district energy system to natural gas boilers. And we'll see that that has a big impact. We can go to the next slide, please. So it's worth talking a bit about scenario analysis. So what we're doing here with the model is scenario analysis, and the business as usual scenario is not a forecast. So we're not pretending to be able to predict perfectly what's going to happen in Ames, what Ames will look like until 2050. We're trying to make a realistic scenario of a likely outcome. But as we know, the future is impossible to predict. Like, for example, the pandemic we're currently in, very hard to predict, big changes everywhere. very drastic changes. So things like that happen in the future and we can't foresee them. What we do with the business as usual is we stay very conservative and we're interested in the big trends. And we want to use that. Well, it's useful to look at too what we're projecting the likely outcome is for Ames. But it's also useful for us when we get to the low carbon scenario to be able to compare what we were predicting or projecting in the business as usual scenario, and then the actions that we're overlaying over that in our low carbon scenario and how they make a difference. So that's the big use for us for the business as usual scenario. Perfect. So here we see results from the model. So here we have total greenhouse gas emissions by sector. On the y-axis here, we have kilotons of CO2 equivalent emissions. And on the x-axis, we have our time horizon from 2018, which is our base year, to 2050. And we have all the different major sectors where we have emissions. So I'll go sector by sector and just talk about the main points that we're seeing, the main changes that we're seeing. So if you look at transportation, it stays relatively stable. We see a slight decrease at first and then even slighter increase later. So there's two main forces driving this change. The first one is our assumption that by 2030, 50% of new vehicle purchases will be EVs. So starting in 2030, you're slowly and gradually changing your vehicle stock to be electric vehicles, and electricity emits less than gasoline, so we see a decrease because of that. And the other force that's making it increase is the population change projected in Ames. So we're projecting an increase in population of about, I think it's 1%, around 1% per year every year until 2050. And so more people means more vehicles, means more travel, and an increase in emissions. The second sector here that we have in our darker blue or purple is the district energy system at ISU. And it's pretty significant, and it highlights the importance of ISU in this plan and the magnitude of activity that happens there when you compare it to the whole city. So this is the second largest emitting sector in our base year of 2018, and that's for only the district energy system at ISU. You'll notice that there's a drop in 2024, a significant drop, and that's the replacement of the coal boilers by natural gas boilers. So coal boilers will emit more per heat supplied, and when you replace it with natural gas, the emissions reduce, and that's the big drop we see there. Next sector is the commercial sector. So that one stays relatively stable and increases with the population, and same thing for residential. So no major changes for those two, except for the increase in population. So you have more houses, you have more commercial buildings, and then more activity, more emissions. Same thing goes for industrial and the other categories too. Basically, all the buildings categories, commercial, residential, industrial, municipal, and then waste and fugitive emissions stay relatively similar and increase with population. So the main two changes we're seeing when we look at emissions by sector are for the transportation sector and the district energy at ISU. And next slide, please.
Sorry, do you want to just address the drop there that we see right at the beginning?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I almost forgot. So there's a big drop here that happens between 2018 and 2019 that affects a bunch of different sectors that I forgot to mention, which is a change in electricity emissions. So this has to do with the electricity supplied to Ames, which is used in all these different sectors. And that big drop, which is really interesting, and I think an important point to consider, is a change in the way electricity is generated in the local electricity system here, the Ames Municipal Electricity System. So by adding more wind generation in 2019 compared to 2018, there was a significant drop in the emissions of electricity. And you see that affect a bunch of different sectors that are using that electricity. So another thing that's worth, or that we need to know is that the municipal electricity system doesn't supply all the electricity that Ames uses. Ames also imports from other sources. And in 2018, the local electricity system supplied around 40% of the electricity, which is still very significant and underlines one of the levers we can look at when we develop the low carbon actions, right? There's a unique opportunity here, which we don't see in many communities, where you can affect directly, locally, your electricity supply, make it cleaner, and see an impact that cuts across a bunch of different sectors here. So here we have the emissions, but instead of looking at them by different sectors, we're looking at them for all sectors, but by fuel type. So you'll notice that drop in grid electricity here from 2018 to 2019. And then as activity rises here, as population rises, you'll see electricity use increase. And it increases even more than just by population. And that's also because of the electric vehicles coming on, using more electricity. And you'll notice gasoline here in blue being squished a bit as we go on in the future, as those gasoline vehicles are being replaced by electric vehicles. Then for natural gas, you'll notice this bump in 2024. That's a different way of looking at that impact from changing the boilers of the ISU district energy system from coal to natural gas. So it's a slight increase or a significant increase in natural gas emissions, but an even bigger decrease in the coal emissions in purple here that disappear by 2024. And you can look at the next slide, please. So here in this graph, instead of looking or seeing the emissions totals by sector, we're looking at energy. And so the y-axis now is in million BTU, or thousands of million BTUs. And every sector stays pretty consistent. There'll be slight increases because of population. And the main one we'll see here is still this story in transportation about EV vehicles and switching over gasoline vehicles to electric vehicles. And the reason that we see the energy use decrease because of the switch is that electric vehicles are about 3 to 4 times more efficient than gasoline vehicles. So for the same use or the same distance you want to travel, the EV vehicle will consume 3 to 4 times less energy. So that's the big change we're seeing here on the energy use side. So that's it for the business as usual results, but I'll take any questions anyone has.
Yeah, well, we're waiting for questions. I would just say, just to underscore too, now we've seen what will happen, of course, as we've said, if we don't take any measures. So we're sort of understanding now the size of the challenge and what it looks like sector by sector, both from an emissions and an energy standpoint. So thank you for that, Eric.
Any questions?
We've got about 10 minutes or so for questions.
So I'm Paul Reedhead again. I'm a 48-year resident of Ames. What do you mean when you say our projections are conservative? I can imagine a couple of different conservative scenarios. Could you please define what that means when you say that?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I agree with you that there could be a few conservative scenarios. What we're trying to capture here is a very likely scenario, maybe the most likely scenario. And what we mean by conservative is that we're only including changes that are like plans that are confirmed or things that are nearly 100% sure to change, to be, or that are committed to. So one example of a change like that is the boiler switch from natural gas or from coal to natural gas in 2024. That's a change that that's very, very likely to occur, and that's planned for and committed to. But anything outside or further out than that, that might be a possible change to one of the sectors, we are not including and being conservative in that sense.
Okay. Do your scenarios consider the increased erraticness of climate in general? So weather patterns, storms, all kinds of things that are really upping the ante for us today currently. It's kind of a new frontier. So I would think that going forward, but we're going to see more of that before we see less. Drought.
Yep, thank you for that question. That's a really good question. What we're modeling here is it's mitigation modeling. So we're looking at, or we're focusing at how to reduce emissions and things that are impacting energy use. And there are changing weather patterns, and there will be differences or increases in floods and droughts and things like that, but those would affect more if we were looking at this from an adaptation standpoint. So for the mitigation standpoint, we're concerned mainly with the big trends, but from adaptation, if we were looking at it to see how climate change will impact your environment, that variability would affect things like damage to buildings, things like this, but we're not looking at that in this instance. We're looking at emissions reductions.
Eric?
Yeah.
Did you speak to HDBs and CDBs?
Yeah, so we are including that, which is the increase in temperature, like a trend in increase in temperature, but not weather variability, like increased likelihood of bigger storms. We're not including that.
One of the things that we found, I think, when we looked at AIM specifically, was based on climate change projections for that area. We would only see, so we see heating degree days and cooling degree days in line with changes in temperature. And I think we only saw maybe a 3% increase in use for heat, even though we're going to see a 30% increase in population, but we saw a very large increase in the need for the likeliness that people are going to use air conditioning based on how hot it will become over the next 30 years.
So this is Chris Anderson again. Still having troubles with my throat apparently. And I have a comment on what you just talked about with the heat, and then I have two questions real quick for clarity on emissions. My comment is your air conditioning is also important at night. So if you're not only looking at just cooling degree days, but also you need to look at humidity to consider really how much people are planning or might want to use their air conditioning in the future. So that's my comment. My question is, does the modeling that you do for emissions distinguish between biogenic carbon and fossil carbon? I wasn't sure if those are emissions that are just total emissions, whether it comes from, I'll give you a specific example because I know a lot about it, using 100% biodiesel in transportation cars. That's a carbon emission, but it's a biogenic carbon emission rather than a fossil carbon emission. And I just wondered if your modeling distinguished between the two. And the second, it seems like as the EVs become more prevalent, do their emissions relate to the emissions of the grid? And can you give us a hint or like an easy explanation of what's the difference between the emissions of the grid and the emissions of gasoline?
I can
Very
answer this one.
good question. So for the first question, for biogenic emissions, for things like biodiesel, those would not be included in the emissions. So anything biogenic would not be included in the totals we're seeing here. For the EVs, that's right, that the emissions we're seeing are the emissions from the grid. So when you plug in your EV to charge and you're pulling from the grid, we're tracing that electricity back in the model to where that electricity comes from and how that electricity is produced. So a cleaner if you have a cleaner electricity supply, you add more renewables to it, then the emissions related to charging your vehicle would be reduced. So that's what we're seeing here in these emissions is the grid emissions for EVs.
Any other questions?
All great questions. Are there more?
Don't be shy. Come on up.
Will this data be publicly available, or will the non-proprietary data be available to like the city of Ames or residents so we can take a look at it?
Yes, so the presentation will, and we're also working on completing and giving to the city a business as usual summary, which provides greater detail on these numbers and where they come from.
Thank you. And an additional question about the model. What was the installed capacity of the wind during your model for their business as usual scenario?
Oh, that's a very good question that I can't answer right away. I know there's wind capacity, but I don't know the actual number. So we're pulling in, I can tell you more about the data that we're pulling in. We're working with the Ames municipal electricity system and using their data for production by electricity production by fuel type or by source. So we have data on the amount of electricity generated by wind. We have data on the amount of electricity generated by natural gas and so on. Yeah, I don't know the exact number for the capacity.
Yeah, that the wind farm is 36 megawatts altogether. 6 of that is Iowa State's portion, and 30 megawatts is specifically with the city. So in the city's numbers, you'd see 30 megawatts of wind, and within Iowa State's portion is 6. And from the data and this part would be details before we gave data to Eric. Biogenic emissions are subtracted. And let's see, so about 94% of the electricity in Ames incorporated limits is served by Ames Municipal Electric Services. And then from one year to the next, we have some agility in deciding how to serve that electricity. And so the percentage that's generated locally versus the percentage that comes from the grid does change year to year.
And on that note, then, what is the installed capacity of the Iowa State boilers?
That's a good question. I would have to pass along to an Iowa State. No, we'll have to get back to you on that one.
Yeah.
Unless Eric has it handy. I don't have that one at the top of my head.
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll get back
Mark
to you.
isn't here right now, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, can I just address your question on transparency? Everything that we're doing here is public record, and when we get the data, we will push it out to the website. It's a very transparent process, and everything that you get the PowerPoints and materials, we'll push them out.
Thank you. Any other questions on BAU?
We have time for one more if somebody has one that can't wait.
Yeah. My name is Anton. I'm a student at Iowa State University. Does this business as usual plan include any renewable energy credits that any organization in Ames may purchase or not? Or does the city consider renewable energy credits as a way of reducing emissions for this model?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe at this point we don't have a way to survey folks who are purchasing renewable energy credits of their own volition for their own organizations or facilities. So the only renewable energy credits that are included at this point would be ones that come from power purchase agreements or facilities that are owned or managed by the city or the university themselves. That's a great question, though.
Thank you.
All right, I think I think you guys had a couple more Mentimeter questions for our group.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it back over to Naomi here to ask those questions, and I am about to share our screen. All right.
Great, thank you.
I'll get us queued up here for the next one. All right, so everybody should now be able to see that next question there.
So yeah, what are your desired outcomes for this plan?
What was that? I got kicked out. Oh, I have the wrong one.
It was, they need the code again. Oh, there it is, right at the
There we go.
top.
So
3173595.
%100% clean energy and carbon neutrality by 2030. Long-term sustainability for the city, net zero GHG emissions. 100% renewable energy by 2030, stop the transition from coal to natural gas at ISU. Another 100% clean energy by 2030, carbon neutrality as soon as possible. 100% clean energy by 2030. Seeing a trend here. Carbon neutrality by 2030, 100% renewable by 2030. Huge drop in emissions. Yeah, quality of life, carbon negative. 100% clean energy by 2030 and electrified public transit. Wonderful. All city facilities carbon neutral in 5 years. All city vehicles electric in 5 years. Divestment from fossil fuels. That's great. 100% clean energy by 2030, carbon neutrality, divest from fossil fuels, and stop the boiler transition.
I'm going to share a few that I can see on my screen here. Great. To invest in green energy and not fossil fuels, 100% clean by 2030, 100% clean energy by 2030 with little to no RECs, renewable energy credits, carbon neutrality as soon as possible, divest from fossil fuels, reduction of energy used at ISU, or complete transparency or justifying the energy usage, and equal safe energy reduction for the community. The City of Ames embarks on an ambitious plan for clean energy, 100% clean by 2030. An aggressive plan that takes advantage of the advantages that Ames has: wind power, solar innovation, biofuels, parklands, 100% clean by 2030. There's a couple more of those 100% clean by 2030s. And an equitable transition to 100% renewable energy and divestment from fossil fuels. Electrification using renewables. And that we are a clean energy example for the state and world by 2030. These are some very, very good answers, great ambition, a lot of alignment, at least between the people that have showed up in the room tonight.
One of the interesting things I'm curious about for the university sort of students in the audience too is the first climate action plan I wrote was for the University of Victoria here in British Columbia, and our goal was to go beyond what we called climate neutral at the time. And because we saw the university itself, of course, as a special site of knowledge generation and initiation for the economy, the local economy, and what's the university's sort of role, in that too. So those are interesting questions I think to consider too, is on the quality of life end of things. And we saw those answers coming in, to how can this transition, of course, to not only be equitable, but also ensure a better quality of life, through the process itself. So, and I'm sure you have lots of great ideas about how that can happen that we would love to hear. Shall we go on to the next question, Brittany?
Yeah, let's move on to our last question of the evening. So, what are your desired? Oh, sorry, please repeat us the same question. Let me navigate here. Sorry, folks.
And of course, you can still keep answering the question that we had up.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free. While we're in this lull here, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the opportunities that will be coming up. So one of the things that you can do to connect with us, of course, is to visit the Ames city website and let us know there through email some of your thoughts and comments. You can find the next engagement opportunities and just connect on all things around the plan. I'm sorry, I'm just finding this here.
That was a bit of a preview of the question, so just to get you ready, is we're going to ask you what you want the community to look like when we move into implementation. Yes. There we go.
I don't know how that changed there, but we've got it now.
Okay, wonderful.
Apologies.
Everyone's on it. You're Mentimeter pros now. I like this. We're all working together. Carbon neutral, energy equity. It's a nice alliteration there. No fossil fuels, bold action, quality of life. Natural gas is not a solution. Investment in clean energy, clean, equitable, I think future for all. Environmental justice. There we go. Carbon negative. So many bike paths.
I was just reading, that's a great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. 100% clean energy by 2030.
Downtown pedestrian mall. I'm very curious what whoever wrote that, what your mental image of that is.
There's no fossils for ISU. Happy was in there too. It's really great to see. Thriving, great word. Denser development, I think I saw in there too. Beautiful community, lovely. Yeah. Maybe, I think something in parks and sort of wonderful. Look at that, 100% clean energy coming through, very clear. No more fossil fuels for ISU. Downtown, yeah, pedestrian mall, see it there now too. Great, it's wonderful. Thank you, everyone. It's great. I think we'll go about 30 more seconds or so, and then we have our guests who've joined us as well, the mayor and the president. So we'd love to hear from them as well. Welcome.
Okay, great, thank you. These are great, and we will be taking these away and taking a look at them along with answers we have received from other groups who've spoken with. So I'm going to stop sharing this now. And I guess before we wrap up and talk about next steps, what we would do is we would welcome the mayor and the university president to speak.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, there aren't any speakers to this room. It's just to the call.
Okay. I'll try and talk loud. People always complain I don't talk loud enough. So, first of all, I apologize for not being here at the beginning of the meeting, but I want to thank all of you for coming tonight and giving your input, and just appreciate the consultants' work as well too, and soliciting input. Due to the significance of this issue, the Ames City Council has made it a priority to go ahead and move forward with the Climate Action Plan, as you're aware. But prior to that, we also did a renewable energy potential study last year, a climate vulnerability assessment, and a greenhouse gas inventory, which the consultants have been provided with all the information. Just want to encourage you, though, is that the city of Ames has been working for many, many decades to really be reducing our carbon footprint, doing things differently and uniquely. For example, what's not shown up on these graphs is the fact that we did convert our 2 huge boilers that produce electricity in the city of Ames from coal to natural gas a few years ago. In a way, we thought, boy, it would have been nice if we could have gone a little farther and captured that. That's one thing that we're doing. But in addition, we have our it's a 2 megawatt solar farm that just went online at the end of last year. We have food waste diversion, and we have a really exciting project, and that is we're converting our highest fuel consuming vehicles on the streets, besides Cyride, but the dump trucks are gone to biodiesel. And we had 5 pilot pilot trucks done on the pilot program a couple of years ago. That has been so successful. We're continuing to convert even more and going to help be more sustainable that way. And so the point is, we're really working hard to reduce our carbon footprint. In addition, we have hybrid police vehicles. And you might ask, why don't you just do it all at one time? Well, one, it's cost. 2 is we want to make sure we can provide service for individuals. And I also just am pleased to share, I just signed a letter of support for Cyride. They're going after, I believe, it's another 3 to 4 electric buses. And they're going to be the articulated buses. The goal is to have Orange Route 100% electrified. But just to give you an idea of the scale and the cost, we have over 100 buses on Cyride. A diesel bus costs about $400,000 to $450,000. An electric bus costs between $850,000 and $900,000. If you start doing the math, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars if we just go ahead and try and whole scale replace the entire bus fleet with electric. But the point is, we are working towards that, and we have converted and brought in power so we can go ahead and recharge buses. So we're working towards that end, but there is quite a cost associated with it. So on behalf of the Ames City Council, I want to encourage everybody, as you are tonight, to continue to be involved and engaged in this process. My understanding is that the consultants are going to help us in the very near future, help us set targets you shared tonight. I appreciate from the questions, and this is one thing that Denise, your Confluence did when we were working on the plaza, just getting this real-time response. I think it's just awesome, and I appreciate that. I know I can't say it enough, but the point is, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and we're in the beginning of this process, and we're committed to it, and we appreciate those that are serving on the community feedback team. They're going to be giving us feedback along the way and consultants on feedback. And sitting next to me is a valued partner, Dr. Winterstein, and I have spent, the last few hours together already, but the point is that Iowa State is a valued partner, and she's become a great friend. And so the collaboration that we have together to make Ames a better place. So with that, climate action planning does require partnerships, cooperation, and a shared vision. And I just want to express my appreciation, Dr. Winterstein, for the fact that ISU is on our team, and several of your experts are also on our feedback team. So I'll turn it over to you to make some comments.
Mayor, thank you so much. Do I need to, this doesn't work, right? Does it? Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you, Mayor. It's a real pleasure to be with you tonight at this session, and to thank everybody who has come and participated in this conversation. This is an important conversation, and one, as the mayor said, that we all have to work together on. So thank you to everyone that has joined in. I want to also just acknowledge Mary Rankin. So years ago, the city and the university came together and established the Live Green initiative at Iowa State, and established the sustainability efforts with city. And that's just one example of how the city and the university work together on important issues, and certainly on sustainability. So Mary, thank you for being that important linkage between the university and the city. I also just want to do a very specific call out to the representatives on this important plan that the mayor mentioned. Dr. Gutowski, Mark Cruz, our students that are part of this important effort. We value and appreciate your work. We also appreciate the work that you're doing on campus, either through the University Sustainability Committee or through your own efforts that you've identified as key to moving us forward to address the critical issues. I am pleased that we're partnering with the city on issues like wind, solar, other renewable energy sources. Those are very important, and those are going to grow as we go forward in the next few years. So I'm very optimistic about what's going to be the potential there. I also want to mention that the Governor has a task force on carbon sequestration. I think that is an opportunity too, and one that the university is heavily engaged in, especially from the work that we do in agriculture. Dr. Lisa Schulte-Moore, who was recently recognized by the MacArthur Foundation, is leading the efforts on that task force from an agricultural perspective, and really looking for how we can implement a carbon negative agricultural system. So great opportunities again, to think differently, to see different solutions, but most importantly, to partner as we go forward to achieve what needs to be done. It's good to be here. Wish we could have been here right from the beginning, but we had a situation where we just simply couldn't arrive on time. So thank you for your understanding of that. And again, thank you for your participation.
Awesome. Well, any final things from the SSG team? Otherwise, I will close us out on this end.
Yes, I believe, Denise, if we can hand it back over to you to talk about our next steps.
Yep, absolutely.
I think good question. Yeah, and I apologize if you were going to say this already anyways in closing, but can you direct everybody who is here tonight to like your website and directions to sign up for announcements and follow up from after tonight?
Absolutely. So as you've heard today, we have an understanding of business as usual, and now we need to talk about what we do about it. So that is where we go from here. Our next step will be diving into what those options could be. We'll come back to the City Steering Committee on November 16th and present those at that time. We'll also be getting a survey out for public input on that, and we'll continue that process as we go. As you mentioned, and thank you for that intro, please do go to the sustainability website for the City of Ames, sustainability@cityofames.org. You will find a link to the Climate Action Plan page there that includes links to upcoming events and how you participate in those. There's also email addresses there. So if you say, oh, I thought of this great question after I walked out the door, who do I send it to? There's a place for you to go there. So please feel free to use that. But mostly I think I'd just like to say thank you for joining us tonight. A 2-hour meeting is not a small commitment. So it clearly shows that this is very important to you all and to this community. So we're thankful to have you here, and we look forward to seeing you at additional events. So
Denise,
thank you
before
all.
you close, I had some conversation with the Ames Climate Action Team, and they had some feedback they wanted to give in terms of how the survey, because I encourage them to reach out.
Okay.
Because the point is, we'll make sure that people feel like they are being. I think there are some limitations in terms of some of the things, the questions that they could respond to was more limited in nature in terms of the information. So if you need, I can give you some people to reach out to. But I think it's important that people know that we want feedback, and we want to make sure, and if there are some hiccups, we want to know about those so we can go ahead and get those corrected. And
I think that's great feedback. I think that there was a little misunderstanding when we got the process started that the survey was not a one and done, that it's an ongoing survey process where the tool will provide input opportunities for different topics. So we were sort of establishing a foundation. We'll move into goal setting, implementation. Those questions will all be different. So that's a great point, that the survey was not once.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll add to the sustainability@cityofames.org, that email address. We're already getting some input from individuals, so thank you for that. Make sure and share that with others so we can use it widely. And then I also want to add the first bullet point up there on the City Steering Committee for November 16th. That will begin at 6 p.m. Instead of 6:30 p.m. So it's kind of a regular council time. So 6 o'clock here in council chambers, and then it will also be on the City Channel 12 and live stream on YouTube and Facebook.
can you clarify too, what the City Steering Committee is actually, because I think there's some, there may be some confusion on that.
Yep. The City Steering Committee is the City Council for this particular project. So they are the ones that are collecting the information. The The consultants are providing them with the options, as we spoke about earlier, on target setting and the pros and cons to each of those. So they'll be the decision makers along the way, but open and welcoming to all input. We really do need to have this be a community effort. And hopefully you got that sense this evening and going forward with the events and meetings that we have established.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for having us. We look forward to hearing from you again.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great night.